All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Today is Thursday, so we're going to talk a little politics, a little current events, a little whatever. Um, I don't know what you had in mind, but I'm feeling kind of ranty and all over the place when it comes to the election results.
Well, I just got your message that you'll be ready in 10,
Hmm, that's
and
odd.
you were ready faster than 10. So, all right. Yeah, I kind of wanted to go start with that at least because I've got some ranty stuff too. Because I was very, what's the right word? I guess political, even though uh, it was more nice when I was saying conservatives need to check this before the midterms, and they're going too far here and going too far there. And you disagreed with me, but it turns out I was right. And I'm looking at the conservative pundits, people like Ben Shapiro and stuff, and this is why we lost. And they're completely ignoring everything that is why they lost. So y'all will do it again next time. But go ahead and start with your stuff, and then I'll come back in on that.
Well, the non-ranty parts first.
Yeah, just the facts first, I guess.
So something that kind of jumped out at me when I was looking things over, and this is, just Texas as an example. Um, but scrolling down, look at the uh look at the margins here.
Mm-hmm.
Whether a Republican or a Democrat won, these are huge margins. So this one here is the closest race, and it's 53 to 44.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that in some ways that could be good. Um, that
Yeah, bring that back up exactly where you were, because
okay.
you showed a red flip that was the closest one. We
Hmm.
got a blue flip that's almost a 3/4 to 25%. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
75%, 73% to 27%, basically.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah.
and then we've got another red flip that's better than 60/40. It's
Hmm. So on the one hand, that's not good because we're becoming increasingly balkanized. On the other hand, it could be good if that meant people were self-segregating ideologically and were willing to live and let live. The problem is they're not.
mm-hmm.
Here in Texas, there's a good example because for forever the hippies in Austin have had this uh this saying of keep Austin weird, and it's their kind of counterculture, nonconformist battle cry, except they don't really mean it because they're not willing to reciprocate. Okay, fine, we'll keep Austin weird. You be a bunch of hippie weirdos in Austin, but you know, leave the people in Midland or San Angelo or wherever alone to do their thing. Fine, we'll let you do your thing. You let us do our thing, except they're not.
Well, and there's also something else to that. There's a disconnect with that. Keep Austin weird is the artsy types
Hmm.
that want the liberal end of freedom of expression, which was the liberal ideal for a while when it came to what's being legislated from on high. Let us have our morals separated from government, and you keep us within the ethics. There's a difference between morals and ethics, right? And that's changed. Now you still got those people that have that mentality saying keep Austin weird, but they forget about Harris County. They forget about Bear County. They forget about parts of the valley. They forget about inner city Dallas. Those are blue for a completely different reason. It's not
Hmm.
freedom of expression. It's because they're urban centers, they're disconnected from suburbia and the rural areas, and all they see is shit. And when all you see is shit, you're going to vote for anything that is hopefully a pass out of there. And they're being manipulated into seeing this handout as the pass, when the handout is what holds them down. So Keep Austin Weird people are thinking a completely different weird than, they want to be the little blip of blue, but they're thinking of the freedom of expression blue. They're not thinking of the oppressive government handouts to control a population blue that you see in other urban centers. Now, there are parts of Austin like that, but they do a good job of compartmentalizing it.
Mm-hmm.
You go down 6th Street and you see homelessness and beggars and stuff, but to see the really bad stuff and the crime, it's very well lit. It's very kind of a bustering place. You don't see gunshots and that kind of stuff. You see petty crime a lot, pickpockets and things like that, but you don't see gang violence on 6th Street.
Yeah.
That's the part they compartmentalize. They're thinking 6th Street weird. Yeah, it's not perfect. There's a lot of bad, shady things that go on, but it's just, it's mostly harmless. They're not thinking MLK Drive in Houston type, not lack of direction, lack of government oversight.
Yeah.
Which in their case would be the cops.
So one of the other things that kind of jumped out at me, just kind of big picture, non-ranty, angry part of me, is the people on the conservative pundits who were thinking this wasn't going to be a red wave but a red tidal wave. The results are kind of confusing to some, but in some ways it's not, because these are some of the same pundits who have pointed out in the past that it's not enough to vote against someone. You have to have someone to vote for.
Yeah, and you're going more in the lines of where I'm
a prime example of that is DeSantis. And this is stark, and enough people aren't pointing this out. This is one of the biggest gubernatorial margins ever. And this is in a state that gave us the term
purple. Yeah.
It gave us the term hanging Chad, for crying out loud. It has been less than 3 points difference, I think, in every presidential race since like Nixon's second term or something like that. That's how close Florida has been. He won by 20%. And keep in mind, DeSantis was elected 4 years ago with a margin of less than 40,000 votes total. I mean, it was a fraction of a percent. That's how tight the race was 4 years ago. And because he did stuff, he stood for stuff, he expressed what he was doing, and he defined himself rather than letting the media and his opponents define him, he won by 20%.
Well, but here's the good and bad of that. The good is he ran his platform. There was part of the non-woke stuff, but it was the anti-lockdown platform. And that was a lot of it. That was the winning strategy for some of these states. It was the anti-lockdown, but what people are forgetting or not seeing is it was only the winning strategy in the states that succeeded with it. Pennsylvania was a lockdown state, and the opponent, and Oz, and whatever the gubernatorial candidate was, ran anti-lockdown campaigns, but the people there don't know any better. They didn't feel the freedom that they felt in Florida. They didn't feel what we felt in Texas. In fact, what you hear from people who have any kind of public personality that have traveled outside of those states, they're surprised by what they see, because you don't get that feeling staying where you're at. Well, the average person voting doesn't travel all that much. So they're seeing people talk about Texas, or people talk about the freedom in Florida, and then they're getting a media spin on it, and they're thinking, oh, well, they're just over advertising this to get my vote. They don't actually have the perspective of, I was there, and yeah, it's actually cool like that. Just like people in the inner city don't know what it's like to be outside of the inner city. They don't know what it's like to be outside of that oppression. Different use of the word oppression than the wokies. The actual things suck, and it's really hard to get out of, especially when you don't know how.
Well, what were some of your thoughts before I get ranty?
Well, the second one was, there was something that was happening in 2020, 2021 that a lot of red state people were afraid of, but what you're forgetting to see is the other side of it, especially since the fear was proven right now unfounded. Was all these people are moving from California, all these people are moving from Pennsylvania, all these people are moving from Maryland, from Massachusetts, from New York to Texas and Florida and the free states. They're going to bring their politics with them. Well, this is the reddest those two states have ever been this election. So that didn't happen. But what it did do was it created a greater concentration of blue in those other states. So the rural Pennsylvania moved down to Texas and Florida. Rural New York moved down to Texas and Florida. People who wanted to get away from that moved away. Philadelphia matters more. Pittsburgh matters more. These blue sections of these other states matter more. The problem is Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Maryland, New York, California, that's 10 senators. Texas and Florida, that's 4 senators. So when you're looking at the House, yeah, it does make a little bit of a difference. But when you're looking at the Senate, you could have a net loss. And we may even see that at this point.
Well, and to your point previously, the taking their politics with them, yeah, that did happen and you can see it reflected in some of the urban centers in Texas, for instance, that got bluer, but there in other places it didn't happen, because when those people spread out into the less blue places, and in Texas and in Florida, they had examples of proactive policy that they could say, yeah, I agree with that.
Harris
To your
County
point about
actually
not
got a
getting
little
out,
less
not
blue.
seeing, yeah.
I think it even came down to today. The Harris County judge, finally the blue side won, but it was by like 16,000 out of over 1 million votes. It was pretty damn close, and she won by a landslide the first time around. So some places got a little better, but
I had another thought that I just remembered about the kind of nuts and bolts poli-sci part of this. I can't remember who I heard say this, but there was someone who was skeptical, a right-leaning pundit who was skeptical of the idea of red tidal wave, because he said what the Democrat Party is banking on is that their traditional bulwark of ethnic voters, Hispanic and black voters, especially black voters, they can turn some of them off. And in fact, I believe this was the highest in a midterm ever of percentage of the Hispanic and black vote that went to Republicans. But it was also historically low turnout, especially for black voters. So the Democrats were gambling that their culture war issues would turn off and depress a number of Hispanic and black voters, but they would gain in Gen Z and TikTok generation women. Some male voters too, but especially women.
Well, when we
and
get to
that
the
paid
particulars,
off.
I want to talk about Pennsylvania in particular, and that plays into it because of how that played out with Fetterman and Oz.
Michigan is an example of this, because Whitmer is awful. She doesn't get as much press as Cuomo did for what he did with the nursing homes and COVID patients because it's New York, so it gets more press. Whitmer did the same thing in Michigan. However, even though
Well, our health
nationally,
secretary did that in Pennsylvania.
yes,
So,
yes, yep, the artist formerly known as Richard Levine. Um,
oh, you just got us banned.
I
Oh,
said formerly.
no, that doesn't matter.
Oh,
Oh,
wait, then who starred in Juno? Was that
no, 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 nope, nope,
okay,
nope, nope.
okay, I'll ignore that.
I will
The
say
so the
he
point I was
misspoke. He
making,
was thinking of Maroon 5 and he wanted to say Adam
yes,
Levine. Yes.
yes, yeah, right. That was it.
Uh
Um, so
no, that is,
nationally,
if this video gets taken down.
it'll be
So
because of that.
whoever watches this on Rumble, we don't even have to go very far into the video to show how Heath got us banned.
Yeah,
And
well,
sorry, Wheel of Time people, if that's the case. If not, well, thankfully the algorithm played in our favor. Maybe I helped us with saying Maroon 5.
don't make a snarky title and it'll be fine. Anyway, the point I was making about Michigan is um Whitmer voters in exit polls ranked abortion very high at or near the top. If you
Same with
look at it,
Pennsylvania.
if you look at it
Yeah.
nationally, it's like 10th, if it even charts at all. It's not something that the overwhelming majority of voters care about. Even if they're pro-choice, they they will vote for a pro-life candidate if they like these other things that they rank higher. That was not the case in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, where a lot of right-leaning pundits thought there was a good chance of an upset.
No, it was not. It. You're saying nationwide, but you're including uh the giant margins in Texas,
Yeah,
Florida,
yeah, yeah.
in those kind of places. But in all of the key places that had the again, Michigan being one of those that should have flipped because of how stupid things were for the last 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania being another one. In all of those places, those key flip states, it was near the top.
Right.
And
And that's where I wish I could remember who the name of who pointed this out. But where a lot of the conservative pundits were expecting a red tidal wave, it was because they were conflating national with local. So you
mhm.
can look at the national results and the national polling of issues and things like that and what people think, but just think back to the Texas numbers I just showed, you've got all these 70-30 races. That's getting lumped into that overall national number. But you drill down and where, you know, that 100,000 people who rank abortion number one, well, that's not a lot. Well, it can be in a local district or a state governor race.
Well, but also look at states that were not a concern of which direction they went. So we're talking overall national numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look at New York. The population puts abortion high if they think it's at risk. But it was not an issue in which way they voted in New York because even your Republican candidates were not zygote type Republicans. They were very moderate, very socially moderate Republicans
Mm-hmm.
with a little bit of fiscal conservative that we need to clean up the streets, we need to do this and that. So you look at a place like that, of course they're not going to poll it that high because they're not that worried about it. Whereas somewhere like Michigan, or no, Pennsylvania is the best example because it was the number one concern for those that voted Democrat. And the problem was they had a close gubernatorial rate, they had close Senate rates, they had close House races. So it actually pulled people out to not have an all red state because it was close in all avenues.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you look at something like New York, it's like, well, if a Republican gets in here or there, the balance of power is going to be there, and we don't have to worry about this thing because we live in New York. Just like in Texas, you don't have to really worry about Texas gun laws because, yeah, if a Democrat, if it goes from what was that 25 to 12 or something split to 24 to 13, you're not going to lose these things you hold dear as a conservative. So you probably didn't put that super high on your local voting agenda. You probably put things like who was a lockdown kind of regulator, which judge enforced these things that were cast down on high, which mayor was the one that wanted to shut things down versus the other county that did. You put those things on. So if you were polled, you didn't have to worry about this issue because it's a non-issue for you. And this being a midterm election, realistically, other than the Senate races, you don't have a whole lot of skin in the game when it comes to the national level.
Yeah. To the point I was making, I just looked up the results, and these are pretty well final. And the margin is big, but
in Texas or
in Michigan,
Michigan,
the percentage is big, but that's because there weren't a lot of voters. In total votes, it was about a 500,000 vote win by Whitmer, and
that's 500,000 in what, an 17-18 million state. That's pretty big.
And you've only got about 4.5 million who showed up to vote. So the totals between the two of them is about 4.5 million. So how much of that is that you excited enough young women to show up and vote because you made abortion a big issue, and Tudor Dixon didn't do a good enough job of exciting the anti-Whitmer vote that was surely there because of her lockdown policies, but they didn't show up to vote. Because that's a pretty low total for a fairly populous state.
You go into your rants because I don't want to double up over yours, and then
Well,
I'll come in.
That's my kind of dry intellectual analysis. My gut emotional reaction is that we, the American people, are stupid and we deserve what we get. Okay, and this is something I was ranting about and arguing with you about when we were kind of back a few weeks ago when we were kind of giving our predictions. Is all right. I can understand if you think abortion rights are really important. Okay. How about being able to gas up your tank? How about the fact that your grocery bill has more than doubled? Since Biden took office, inflation is up almost 500 freaking percent. Nationally, now again, this gets into the numbers we were just talking about and some of the more lopsided races, but nationally, the exit polls showed something like 78% of people think the country is going in the wrong direction. You would not know that by the election returns. If the country is going in the wrong direction, then why wasn't there a massive wave of anti-incumbent voting?
Oh, you're talking about during the primaries? Or
No, I mean now.
No.
I mean now. If you think the country is going in the wrong direction, but too many people were married to their party politic identity. There weren't enough. One of the reasons why the conservative pundits were thinking there was going to be this red tidal wave is because they had convinced themselves that there was this growing base of dissatisfied people that were joining the Republican voters. And you saw that in Florida, because not only did DeSantis win by a ludicrous margin, but you could see it coming because Republican registrations were at an all-time high. That he had added, it was some ridiculous number, like 250,000 to the registration rolls of Republican voters. that was the impact he had had on the voting demographics in Florida. So you could convince yourself that all of these people who are dissatisfied are going to vote Republican because the Democratic Party is in power. But what the election results showed is that there are still plenty of people that will look at what's going on and saying, we're going to hell in a handbasket, but I refuse to vote for the other people.
So if you're a suburban commuter, everything you just said makes 100% sense. But if you live in inner city Philadelphia, not a whole lot has changed for you. Grocery bills are a little higher, but they were always too high for you. You don't
Well, it's not a
drive
little
anywhere.
higher. I mean, 500% inflation isn't a little higher. Well, now, granted, if you are on some sort of assistance, then you're not going to feel that. You're not going to feel that pinch to that point.
Yep, and you're getting fed a message because remember, we're looking at the news on a national level and then what we get locally. So you've got to account for what another person in another locale is getting locally. And first of all, this utopia that we seem to be living in, because gas prices are lower in Texas than anywhere else. Groceries haven't gone up as much as most other places, even though we can still see it and feel it. So all of these things, you don't believe that if you can't get out of where you're at. Plus, you talked about government assistance. Well, everything's going up for everybody. We'll just help you out more. And that's my platform. Yes, this inflation thing you're hearing about in the news, it's happening. It happens all the time after a crisis. We're going to push for more help for you because everybody's got to go through this and you're disadvantaged. That's the message you're getting. And that message resonates when life sucks. And sometimes the only reason you're alive is because of the assistance you've been getting. It doesn't matter that it's what's holding you down. You don't see that in the moment. You're treading water in the middle of the ocean. The fact that you didn't pick a direction and swim never crosses your mind. You're trying to keep your head above water. And that's the difference in messaging. We're talking about something from where we sit. You got to kind of try to put yourself in somebody else. Remember the saying, I would make the same decision if I was that person in that moment. Right?
No, and that makes sense. It's still emotionally ranty, angry Heath thinks it's still stupid. And the worst
this is where the Republicans could have made a difference, and they didn't. They took the fact that shit was going down so bad on a national level to take their own conservativeness, go a little bit more right and run with it because we can get away with more because we're on the right side of history. The problem is you suck at messaging.
Well, yes, because, paying more attention to the news and punditry coming from the right, there wasn't really a message. There were messages.
Okay, so this is where a positive messaging would have. This is one of the few times in history, and nobody went with it, and it sucks. That positive messaging would have beat negative messaging. Because look at abortion rights. We'll talk about abortion rights. You could have run an ad in one of these places where they're scared of it going the other way that says, look, we're not going to go extreme on this. You could have laid your platform out in an ad instead of saying your opponent is responsible for all the criminals on the street. You could have said, look, we want to support our cops. We want to do all these conservative, typically things, but then pick something your opponent's afraid of and say, look, we're not going to call it a zygote, however you want to frame this. We're begrudgingly pro-choice in this to a degree. We're not going to try to nationalize, an abortion ban. You could have said all the things you're not going to do and try to alleviate some of that in these swing areas.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That would have been a true message because the conservative side of this is states' rights. You don't want to nationalize abortion ban because then you would be going against state rights. But what happened was the GOP and to some degree outside of the GOP, the Trumpers the associations with that, propped up these super conservative, socially conservative candidates in these areas, and that's what shot them in the foot. And you couple that with a lot of really red areas that were conservative, like Oklahoma is a great example, passed basically an abortion ban, a zero. It's even worse than the Texas heartbeat bill. Texas is, you can lump them into what I'm saying here. And so I'm in Philadelphia, and I could possibly end up contributing to my state being all red congressionally and executively, congressionally, and I don't know the makeup of their Supreme Court, but I think it's more red than blue. And so I could end up putting a balance of power in favor of this other side. And look what's happening in these other states where it's that way. So now this is a big issue for me, because I could screw myself by siding with the other side. Whereas in our area, it's like, well, you know what? We need to flip these, because I need balance of power on the federal level to help me in my area where I've had things good. And there's a completely different mindset going to the polls. We're not scared of the same things they're scared of, because a group of people have taken the power that they thought they had. They were using the power that they didn't have yet, which is what I said, 2 or 3 months ago. I said, they're doing this before the 2022 elections, and they don't even have that right yet. And it shot them in the foot, because those were the concerns in those areas.
And it's understandable on an intellectual level to a degree, except in frickin' Pennsylvania. I know he's frickin' Dr. Oz, and I can't stand him, but you just elected a vegetable.
Well, look at the progression though. Before he was a vegetable, he was going to cream Oz. It was like a 20-point difference. And then he became a vegetable, and it was almost 50-50. So that's how much in the deficit they were. Now, in the primaries, they had a lady named Kathy Barnett, who was very articulate, very intelligent, very fiscally conservative, a little bit more socially moderate, and they smeared the hell out of her to get Oz in place.
Yeah.
And she went to BLM rallies, and she got up on stage because no one was going to deny a black woman getting on stage, and then shocked the hell out of them by saying, "I'm Kathy Barnett. I'm a Republican. Now check your emotions." And they took that and they cut off that last sentence and said, "Look, she's a BLM supporter."
Yeah, Hannity was probably the worst offender here.
Hannity's one of those establishment Republicans.
Well, he's a hack. Yeah, and he's proved it the past couple of years. He's a complete hack. I don't know that it would have mattered if you're going to elect a vegetable. I think you're lost. There's no coming back from that. But she would have had a better chance than Oz, in large part because
she was going to inner city communities and talking about the same things I'm talking about right now, which is one of the reasons I was kind of, I have to take outside information to have that thought too, because I live in Friendswood, Texas. I lived in those kind of areas before. So what she was saying was resonating with me, because I'm like, that's exactly what me and the neighbors around me would have needed to hear at that moment. And that's what they were missing. And the Republicans in a lot of these areas, especially the national GOP, don't get it. Every conservative you talk to says, well, why can't people just, why can't people not have sex? Why can't people just not do this? Why can't people just spend less money?
It's like telling someone with clinical depression, just stop being depressed. Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
Or someone who freaking eats too many sweets, to say, just quit eating sweets. Someone who drinks too much, why can't you just stop drinking? That's the worst thing you could tell somebody.
Because human nature is human nature. That's why.
In fact, that you were talking about, why is this such a big issue with you? You turn the ears off of somebody when you use that kind of language. And that's what the GOP did, is they thought they were on the right side of history, and nationally they probably are at this moment. But they used the power of that thought way too prematurely and way too aggressively. And it basically, if you were a Democrat that was frustrated with your side and you were leaning, okay, you know what? I'm going to vote red for the first time in my entire life. And then you see that, you say, you know what? Maybe we have as good a chance of fixing the Dems from within. And so you slide back the other way. And Fetterman was really popular before he became a vegetable.
Well, that's why to me that race is so inexplicable, because even before he became a vegetable, he was a piece of
Well, and
garbage.
again, I'm going to say this on record. I hope it's temporarily a vegetable, because you can come back from it. Our brains do heal really well. And realistically, I actually wish some of these things that happened in an oral setting, we could have done in a written setting, because people who have had a stroke can't talk the way they want to sometimes, but they can write it down.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish he would have been given some of these things in where he could sit and think and use a pen or a keyboard, hit backspace every once in a while. When he gets to the Senate floor and everything, and he's actually thinking about a vote, we want to know what the actual thoughts are, not what comes out his mouth. And we never gave him that chance.
See, I'm not that understanding, for the simple fact that communication is an integral part of the job that he wants. He is not.
Yes, but that could come
the
back.
job. It could, but right now it's not, and it's a 6-year term.
Let me put it this way. I would rather someone who had the right thoughts but had trouble communicating in office than someone like Dr. Oz, who's a great communicator, and I don't trust a word that comes out of his mouth, because he would sell you the latest, greatest pill because they were sponsoring his program.
To me, that's just part of the insanity of why we're doomed as a country.
Are you a Bill Clinton fan?
No.
We have not had a better communicator than him, other than some people think Obama, but nobody was better than Bill Clinton. What was in his head and what he wanted to do was not what he said to you.
Electing Fetterman is like allowing someone who's blind to go to the police academy. You are physically incapable of doing the job. We can feel sorry for you. We can have empathy for you. I don't, because I think Fetterman was a piece of garbage before he had a stroke. But you are physically incapable of doing the job. And there were so many people who were tied to that blue jersey that they had to vote, not even just leave it blank of, well, I can't vote for Oz for all of these reasons. All right, don't vote. I didn't vote for Abbott because I think he's a political weasel. I just left it blank.
Yeah, but not voting is like voting for the other person to some degree. That's Pontius Pilate type talk. It's not my problem. I didn't vote for him. You can protest vote, but you actually still attach your name to what you think should happen, and you hope that actually makes an impact.
Buying into a false binary. So this is actually leads into something I wanted to talk about, because the wife was making fun of me after we voted.
Okay, well, let's talk about you're taking if you voted for Fetterman, you're taking a null over a negative. So if you hated Oz enough, that's a negative. That's a step back. Whereas if you said Fetterman, well, he's having trouble doing these things, but at least his political views align with mine. You're taking a null. He's not going to push any policies forward in the situation he's in it right now. But he's not going to go in the negative direction either.
You affirmatively voted for someone who is physically incapable of doing the job.
They also elected a dead guy in Pennsylvania.
They did do that, yes.
Now, the pundits are making it a big deal about the Republican. That's not a Republican fail there, because the next best party was Green, and thank you for voting the dead guy. See, again, they picked a null versus a negative. I would rather they pick the dead guy and we have some sort of special election later than the Green Party candidate.
I don't understand how you can put your name to that, even though voting is anonymous. But I mean, you know who you voted for, and you know that you voted for a vegetable. You know that you voted for a dead guy.
And I think that's the difference. I'm really trying to do my best to understand why people do things. And when you really dive into that, you can you can separate what you would have done versus what was done by other people. And that doesn't make you change your own mind, but it makes it easier for you to talk to those people the
Well,
next time.
I can come up with reasons why someone would do that, all the things that you've said. I can't find any acceptable reason why
Well,
someone would do that.
what's the acceptable reason of letting the other side take the trophy?
Okay, there's a couple of reasons. One, uh, like I said, you know who you voted for, and if you affirmatively vote for someone awful, then that's on you. It's why in 2016 I left the presidential section blank, because I'm not as awful as I think Hillary is. I'm not going to affirmatively support someone who I think is a carnival barker and is just being politically expedient. I don't trust him to do the things he said he was going to do. So I left it blank. The other reason is because those vote totals say something. All right. I voted for, I couldn't remember when I got in there, I couldn't remember which libertarian candidates I actually liked. But ultimately, what I ended up doing, and this is what the wife was making fun of me for, is for those offices where I knew it wasn't voting non-Republican or Democrat wasn't going to matter, but where I wanted to send a message that I have a more libertarian philosophy on this. For a lot of people don't know, the railroad commissioner in Texas has way too much power.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and
I voted
same
live
with,
on that one too.
yeah, I voted the
Yeah.
libertarian as a statement that I don't even think this office should exist. And I did that on a number of those statewide kind of cabinet positions. Is your vote for that other party says something. It says, no, I don't agree with either of you. Even leaving it blank says something, because people will look at these vote totals and say, yeah, that happened in the Beto Cruz election, is that fewer people, even though Cruz won rather handily, fewer people voted for that Senate race than voted for governor. That says something. That lets Cruz know, hey, you're not convincing everybody. You got fewer votes than the Republican who got elected governor.
But
That should
that
say
didn't, and
something
that's
to
why you
you.
don't like him now.
No, it didn't.
Yeah.
He did not adjust. He did not react. But he got the message. He ain't a dummy. And the political people around him aren't dummies. They get the message. Whether or not they do anything about it, that's up to that individual.
See,
But for
you kind of went into this by saying I was thinking in a binary way, but I think
you know,
you're thinking in a binary way, because there's two things, or there's several things that come out of an election, and it depends on what's on the ballot. So there were a lot of cases where only candidate. Well, a no vote there sends a message, because if there are 4 million votes cast and you're the only candidate on there and you get 500,000, that sends a huge message. But there's no consequence other than the message. The only consequence to that is he gets more votes or he doesn't get more
there's
votes.
not an immediate consequence. That doesn't mean there's not a consequence.
Well, there's a consequence. The consequence is attached to the vote or no vote, where there's multiple consequences when there's two candidates on there and you hate the one that's on the side that normally you align with, but you also will be helping the one that is on the side you don't normally align with, who you also hate, but you're so mad at the one that should be on your side that's there's multiple consequences there. Now, if the one that's on your side wins, but you no vote, well, yeah, you get your way, because you send that little bit of a message. He or she wins by less than they thought they should have, and maybe they get the hint. But there's also the consequence that you might be allowing the other person that you also don't like, but you're not mad at, because they're usually on the other side, so you don't like them for their policy reasons. So your anger towards the person that aligns with you ideologically, more so anyways, is allowing you to align yourself in a half a vote. A no vote is a half a vote towards the side of that you don't align with just because you're not mad at that person. So there are multiple consequences on the ballot. And yeah, just the regular no vote for Abbott, a no vote for Abbott, he was going to win Texas. Anybody who thought Beto had a real chance, the fact that he got 46% was a surprise, and it was probably due to no votes like yours, not due to votes that he got on his own. Mm-hmm. Beto was never in danger of being our governor. So a no vote there, that makes sense. But you're looking at something that was 50-50 going into it, and that's only because the guy had a stroke. That's a no vote there is a vote for the other side. Or again, a half a vote. If I'm a 2006 Chicago Bears lineman, I'm still blocking for Brian Griese, even though he has no business playing quarterback in the NFL, because he was on my team. And if for some odd chance Brian Griese ever watches this, I'm sorry. I'm comparing you to other quarterbacks, not to myself, so don't call me an armchair quarterback. Now, where protest votes make more of an impact is where they show up on paper.
Okay, see, yeah. I think that kind of crystallizes my thought there. That's the disconnect here, is it's not just a protest vote. It's not just because I'm angry at the guy. It's an affirmative statement. I'm not just not voting because I'm pissed off. I'm not just voting as a sign of protest. It is an affirmative statement. I am affirmatively saying, I don't like either of you. If I vote for one of you, then I'm affirmatively saying you are acceptable to me. None of you are acceptable to me. So
no, and I hate that these politicians take it that way. But again, we have to work within a system here. And that system is we get to pick from some candidates to go to represent us in a bigger race. And then we get to pick from whoever wins that one to represent us in the bigger race. And if I don't like a lot of things about the one who's representing us in either of those levels, you still got to say, okay, so this, like I did pros and con lists on there. And it was, okay, this I like, this I like, this I like, this I don't like, but this is my rank order of priorities. You made a big deal about the priority list across the nation earlier, where abortion was, where the inflation was, and everything. Well, if everybody had done that, maybe we would have got the result that you think would have been better for the country. Whereas when it came to when you're talking about other candidates now, you're throwing that priority list out the window just because you think that person is going to take a mandate from your vote. And again, I hate that they do that because, I mean, Biden barely won the presidency. But his first speech was, we have a mandate to do X, Y, Z. And he came out there with executive orders showing you that he thought we had a mandate to do X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm. There was no mandate there. You barely won. It was a 50-50 split. And by the way, with your speeches, that other 50% hates you more and more every day. So where the politicians are taking it as far as that's a different place than what I have to do when I'm looking at. Now, if I'm completely apathetic, that would be a result of neither side was going to benefit me in any way. Or what I thought benefited my area or the country, or depending on what level it's at. Some races are a wash. But when we talked about that Senate race, 50-50 is different than 51-50, 52-50. So it's a huge difference at that time, and you got to make decisions differently. You're sitting there with a bunch of bills in front of you, you're deciding which one to pay because which one's going to hurt me more.
If I'm 100 pounds overweight, then I might as well just eat the Twinkie and drink the Mountain Dew because it's not that much in the grand scheme of things. And if I don't, it's not really going to impact the fact that I'm 100 pounds overweight.
If I'm an inner city black male that the only people that pay attention to me are my running buddies on the street. Might as well vote the way it's always been, because
So you're always going to be 100 pounds overweight.
and you're always going to be, yeah.
That
And
that was my point about saying there's no consequence. There are there are consequences down the road, and if all we ever do is choose between the lesser of two evils, then all we ever get is evil. If you don't like the system, stop propping up the system.
well, that has to happen a lot earlier than these type of elections, though.
Well, but the point about the analogy of being 100 pounds overweight is it has to start somewhere. If you say that it doesn't matter, that this one thing won't make a difference, then it never will. Okay, well, I drink way too much soda, so
You're making a
I'm
false equivalence here, though, because
no, I'm not.
you got to add, again, there's multiple things on the ballot. You're 100 pounds overweight. There's a Twinkie and a soda in front of you, or there's a double stuffed Twinkie and maple syrup to wash it down with in front of you. One is still better than the other. And if those are your only two choices, which do you choose? And when it comes to this, the walk away from both is choosing to move. That's the only realistic choice when it comes to your local state politics. Is if I don't like either choice and I'm refusing to make the better of the two choices, then I'm going to move somewhere that allows me better choices. Those are your only options.
The false binary is not your only options. If you All right.
Okay, yes, there was a libertarian on the ticket and there was a Green Party
No,
person on the
no, no.
ticket. Yeah.
The point of not voting, if no one meets your minimum standards, is because, to quote the great philosopher Major Payne, one is a shit sandwich and the other one's soggy. I don't want to eat either because they're both shit. If you don't like the system, you don't like the constantly having to choose between the R or the D and never liking either one, then stop propping up the system. Yes, it might take a while to turn the ship, but it's never going to turn if you don't grab the wheel and start to make it move.
But this isn't the level you grab the wheel.
No, it can be. It's not just in the primary. If you show up and vote in the primary to affirmatively say this is the kind of person that aligns with my ideals, and that person doesn't win, and the other person is wholly unacceptable to you, then don't pull the lever just because he wears the same jersey.
Trying to think how to say this. Biden's speech after this. So one thing that has to be clear is Republicans didn't get a tsunami or a wave.
Mm-hmm.
They still won the day.
Yeah.
But they won it in the way that every midterm after a new president comes in kind of happens. So it was status quo. And because of how bad things have been the last 2 years, status quo feels like a loss.
Mm-hmm.
And so they still won the day. And Biden's speech in response was basically nothing's going to happen for the next 2 years. And I'm okay with that. That's a step in the right direction. Right? Because we were sliding down a hill, and basically because they won the day, it stopped.
The frustration is that.
But no, I got a further point with this,
okay,
because we were using Abbott as the example.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if we shift the House or the Texas House and Senate to the blue side and Abbott stays in power? He gets the same message that Biden just got. Biden finally got the message that nobody liked what he's doing. Now people are making, but again, this is punditry. This is people dramatizing things. They're saying, oh, he has no incentive to change things because he wasn't the worst midterm president in history.
Mm-hmm.
No, but again, we've talked about a lot of the ways the makeup of the country has changed over the last couple of years that were unprecedented. But he still got the message that I don't have this mandate that I thought I did. And nothing's going to happen for 2 years because I don't have everything in my favor.
See, that's not how I read those statements. The way I interpreted that was one of the constant attacks from the Democrats against the Republicans is that they're do nothing. That I read that as spin of, I can't do all these great things because the Republicans are going to block me. I did not see that as a message at all, or having received the message of dissatisfaction at all. And that whatever he can push through executive order or through legislative shenanigans, he's going to keep doing.
But it keeps it from ever being legislative, because if it's a unconstitutional executive order, it will get stopped at the Supreme Court level, just like the student
theoretically.
Well, the student loan thing's a great example. It's not doing well for him, though I don't think he ever expected it to. He just thought it would win votes. But I'm just saying the message can be clear in a lot of ways. But this is one of you're right in one thing. Really right in one thing. One of the disenfranchising moments with the Republican Party is it is a do nothing. But I'm going to say it's even worse than that. It's a do what the Dems do, just more slowly. And like you said, a shit sandwich or a soggy shit sandwich. Yeah, that shit sandwich goes down just a little bit more slowly. The soggy one at least is lubed for your pleasure. You can suck it down, but and that does have to change. But what level? Where do we start with that? Now we're talking a completely different problem. We had to stop. See, I voted more red than I'm used to because we have a lot of things that have gone into play that need to be slowed down. It was the idea of a mandate, and we had to stop that. So that's what I voted for. I didn't vote for this candidate because they're the best at everything I like, or even a lot of things I like, but they will stand in the way of this other thing that is worse. And those are the choices we have. I mean, to say otherwise is not facing reality. It's you make the best of the environment you in. It's a survival situation. And then you try to slowly make the environment more enticing over time. One of the problems for us as me and you, and then all 10 people that might watch this, and all 3 that have made it this far, is we were born into this established process that had been building to this for 300 years. And probably if we were to get it to, if you were a founding fathers lover and you liked exactly what they did and that's how you wanted it to be, it would probably take, if everything went right, another 300 years to get back to that. So, hold on, put someone at the door. I'll be right back. Sorry for that hiccup. I do not suffer door-to-door salesmen very well, especially since we have a big sign that says don't do it.
Yeah. So I think we've gone round and round on that aspect of the election enough.
Yeah, and well, I think the Oz situation is a great example. And you brought up the turn-up in the Whitmer situation. That's what not voting because you're not happy does. I mean, ultimately, the result's the same. The results, we have to live with the result. And whatever your principles are for doing something, that feels good in here and it helps you sleep. But everybody that's got to live with that result, it doesn't help any of that. And again, yes, you're encouraging some politicians, but we have to figure out a way to disincentivize that. And that's not here nor now. That's not here or now. That's another process entirely.
Well, that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah, in fact, we need to discourage government outreach or interference to begin with. And this isn't the libertarian part of me talking. This is the part of me that saw what happened over the last 2 years talking. So they're remember, we're their boss. They're not our boss. And I think that's a mentality that needs to be projected out. And I think the public, the culture sphere is where that actually is. That's where people like us come in. And to 100 million times more, people like Joe Rogan and even the Ben Shapiro's of the world, even though I think he's completely getting this one wrong, but his spot is where you would do this, is we need to take back the reins. We are the boss. And yes, we disagree on some things, as me and you just did for about an hour. But at the same time, we probably have about 80% of our lives that are common ground. We buy gas, we buy groceries, we put our kids in school. You homeschooled, but my kid is in public school. Some people don't have the choice to homeschool.
Yeah, I did it just for a little bit because we had to move in the middle of a school year.
Yeah. So finish your thought, and then I'll close out with Republican messaging and lessons that should be learned.
My last thought on the election is that, I can analyze intellectually, I can rant and react emotionally. I've done both, but then there's just some straight up confusion and things that to me are just inexplicable. I mean, more inexplicable than Pennsylvania voting in a vegetable for senator is the Georgia election. And here's why. This just makes no sense to me. And I'm curious what you think. I don't understand how the same electorate that voted governor, attorney general, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, all by significant margins, didn't vote in someone with the popularity and name recognition of Herschel Walker also on that ballot. This is almost certainly going to a runoff in which he will probably win. Maybe, I don't know. But I don't understand how.
Well, in Georgia, if you add the libertarian vote, he wins.
Okay.
Because
I was looking for numbers and I couldn't find any.
But again, he's a candidate that maybe about 5% of those Warnock voters would have voted, who are voting against him. And this is telling you, this is why candidates matter. This is why the money machine propping Walker up is why they're failing. Because he's a horrible candidate. He has name recognition, but
policy wise, he's not that different from Kemp. They were saying a lot of the same things. And that's where to me, it's inexplicable. Is here he's winning by about 9 points, Kemp, and on the campaign trail, they were saying a lot of the same things. I don't get it.
It's that overall, again, it's that overall fear. Kemp as your governor versus Herschel Walker flipping the U.S. Senate. You all of a sudden get a little less comfortable with where you're placing that check mark. And Herschel Walker was so bad of a candidate that, again, when things look really bad on one side, you kind of drift back to your comfort zone.
From your perspective,
a lot of people just didn't vote. They might have left that blank.
Yeah, but why? From your perspective, why was Herschel Walker such a bad candidate?
He wasn't very politically savvy. First of all, he wasn't very intelligent on the stage. He's way too ultra conservative on some issues, such as the abortion issue. He didn't connect with the voting base. If he was out there playing football, he would have connected with everybody. But going out there and talking to people, he just resonated. I'm going to win this because of my name.
I only saw or heard him a couple of times on the campaign trail, and it was in sit down or phone interview settings. And in that kind of a setting, that kind of a one-on-one exchange, he was great.
Yeah, but nobody watches those.
Mm.
They watch the commercials and the debates. And that's even the debates is way second to the commercials. He alienated his own son in the middle of this. Someone through all of the 2020 and then the George Floyd stuff and everything who was doing things hand in hand with his dad. And then he started going ultra conservative on the campaign trail and basically throwing his son under the bus. And don't think that went unnoticed, especially since the son was very public about it. And you talked about the TikTok crowd and social media crowd, also very social media savvy. So it was not a good look to have your son take to millions and millions and millions of followers to basically berate his dad on all the things that were campaign worthy. So it was a bad that was a bad look, but he just didn't connect. I didn't think he connected very well at all. But again, people also saw that he was the GOP and the Trump-backed candidate, and that threw a lot of people off. So I actually think that percentage breakdown, and I would love to see do you have the totals on there as well?
I couldn't find the totals, no.
Because remember, we just had a 30-minute discussion about why non-voting counts. How many people hit Kemp yes and then didn't vote for Walker? Didn't vote for Warnock, but didn't vote for Walker. I bet you that lib is higher for that Senate race than it is for the gubernatorial race. Because remember, what we have in the gubernatorial race is also a very unlikable candidate. That's Stacey Abrams. So was Kemp more likable, or was he the status quo and he's not Stacey Abrams? Warnock is the status quo and he's not Herschel Walker. Fetterman was the status quo, albeit not very articulated at the moment, but he's not Mehmet Oz. We live in a day and age when it's voting against, not voting for. And when you're voting against, you can vote for the ham sandwich. Wasn't that a Futurama episode or a Simpsons episode where a ham sandwich won?
It might have been Futurama.
Well, it's very close to having had come true. So it's I would like to see the vote totals if it were not non-votes, because that would actually bring my point home that not voting votes something else. And again, there's repercussions to it. Is Herschel Walker the guy that I think would be a great senator? No, he's not very much more bright than Fetterman at the moment. But would he have been a stopgap against a lot of the crazy, far extreme policies that are happening on the left side right now? Absolutely. So again, it's a vote I would have ticked, but it's not a vote I would have been happy with.
All right. Well, what were your final thoughts on election?
Well, that's a great example of it. If you had looked at what people wanted from a candidate, you wouldn't have picked Herschel Walker there. In that race against Warnock. Warnock is a very charismatic person. He's
a preacher.
He's got that vibe. He's good looking. He goes out there and he can talk circles around anybody. He was a preacher, but I think he's got a law degree, doesn't he?
Maybe.
Yeah, he's very well versed in legal theory. I know that because of the way he talks. He is very good at articulating. He's the kind of person that makes you almost believe critical race theory, because he can put it in words that make you understand, and then you feel words, right? When someone speaks to the point where you feel the words, now I can put a narrative in your head because you're feeling it, and then you can start. I saw this the other day, and all of a sudden that's the forefront of your mind, or this happened, and it kind of reinforces, and you kind of want to believe. So
a good example of that is that you try never to say, "Hey, don't let me forget," because you're putting that negative on whatever it is. Hey, I need to remember. Help me remember. There's a positive spin there, that actually makes it easier to remember what it is you're trying to remember.
Well, why do you remember Morgan Freeman narrations so well? Because of the way he talks, his inflections, the way he brings it into your mind as if it's this voice you've always wanted in your head. Right? He has that charisma. So, but he's also extreme in his views. He is very extreme in his views. So what you needed was someone who's at least 75% as charismatic and not extreme in any way, shape, or form. You needed a Youngkin to come in there and basically come up with all these things that he's doing. This is what's scary about it. And this is what I would do differently. And Herschel wasn't that guy. He was not that guy. It's Fetterman, before he had a stroke, he was an everyman. And really, realistically, from what I'm hearing from
he
the
presented
left,
himself as an everyman. That's why
well,
I
he
think he's
presented
garbage
himself as
to
everyman. But well, same with Warnock. He's charismatic, which means he's probably a Machiavellian narcissist, right? He's another Bill Clinton, right? But at the same time, Fetterman presented himself as an everyman. He was in that. And what did they bring in to contest that? They brought in a carpetbagger celebrity. That's not what Pennsylvania wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted someone who was local. They wanted somebody in the streets interviewing, going and changing the roles. That's why I bring up Barnett, because that was the extremity of what they presented and what was actually propped up by the GOP versus what the people actually wanted. Well, and I guess this leads to your point. Why keep voting for the shit sandwich? Well, because both parties keep presenting us a shit sandwich. Now, where's your solution to that?
Stop propping up the system. Don't vote for them.
Well, that would take a conservative effort on both sides at the same time. Now, you figure out how to make that happen, and I will join that. But at the moment, we got to just find little ways here and there. And realistically, the battle right now is on the culture war. It's the Disneys versus the Daily Wires. It's the actual stand-up comedians versus what is considered stand-up comedy now. This is where the battle is, because once a reasonable voice can win that culture war, then a lot of these propped up systems lose their power.
Yeah, that's true. Because Andrew Breitbart had a saying that politics is downstream of culture. And I've made this point in a different way, talking about the perception that George W. was a dummy. And you look at his resume, and by golly, he was no such thing. But he talked funny. You know, he had that drawl, and he would occasionally have a gaffe. And then every single late night comedian and Saturday Night Live sketch about him was about how he was a dummy.
Well, and you look on the other side of the aisle, and pretty much exactly the same time, look at the Clintons when they talk in New York, listen to, I should say, and then listen to the Clintons when they go back to Arkansas. They start talking with a drawl and come up, and then they go up north and they sound like a news broadcaster.
Yeah.
But you're correct. Culture is upstream of politics, which is what BlackRock figured out. Right? They figured out, let's hijack the entertainment industry, the advertisement industry, and then go from there. And look what happened. Everybody, it not only created the thoughts in your head that they want to go forward, but it blinded you to what was going on behind the scenes.
Hey, Sam, what's the most important meal of the day?
If you ask me, or if you ask Kellogg.
That's why I'm asking you, because it's a great representation of what we're talking about here, and something that is theoretically less contentious, because it's not a political issue, but it's one of the reasons we bring up the fitness industry, not just because, you know, we've worked in it, you're still working in it, and we study it a lot, it's because it's so illustrative of larger issues that we have problems with, of the way that buzzwords and marketing can twist your brain and, turn you into a religious zealot over a freaking diet.
Which actually, this might be a good kind of wrapping up everything analogy, which is, I think, one of the reasons Republicans and conservatives are so bad at this is the reason fitness works so well is it's so organic. Whereas conservative-minded people tend to be more like engineers.
Mm-hmm.
Engineering is so precise. This goes here and everything works. Your mindset of inflation is this way, gas prices are here, this is this, so the country should run this should vote this way. No, it's a living organism. It's a collection of living organisms, and we've got to get into the minds and bodies of everybody everywhere, which actually leads into something I think is one of the fixes now that the Republicans have pretty much the House and maybe a one vote lead in the Senate. Is one of the fixes, if you want to go forward and you want to have some aggression, is just start pumping out bill after bill after bill after bill, but they all are reasonable. They're all moderate, they're all reasonable, but they're all something that would hurt Biden with the far left crowd. So he's either going to sign Republican bills that are reasonable, or he's going to keep vetoing things that help the American people. And you do it, again, one after the other, but in a wide range of topics. So in 2 years, you pick the topic for the area you want to target. You put a reasonable abortion bill out. Then you target those scared people in Pennsylvania. We put a 20-week bill out, but he didn't sign it because he wants to cut the heads off babies. That's a better argument than just not even talking about it, which they did this last time around, saying, oh, it's not an issue. Inflation, inflation, inflation.
I had that thought when you were talking about that is because from my perspective, there was no GOP message. There were GOP messages. There wasn't any kind of national movement from the party apparatus. And to your point, how easy would it have been for like the GOP election committees to run national ads just quoting it's not the Roe v. Wade decision. It was the Mississippi law, the decision, and say, look, this is a state issue, and this is what we believe. We're not going to impose anything on the national level. The Supreme Court has said, and we agree, this is for you, your state legislatures, and your state government. What we Republicans on the national level are going to focus on are these things. Mm-hmm. You can decide for yourself how you want to live as your state.
And a lot of the candidates themselves as people did that from the stage, but they were talking to their own audience. They still ran the against my opponent negative ads to the people watching the football games and the baseball games.
And my point about the comedians and the Saturday Night Live skits about W is because how much of perception is determined nationally. Mm-hmm. So
yeah. So if you don't address it on your own local level, so then it's easy for the other side to point to something that's happening somewhere else and attach it to you.
Yeah.
Was it Idaho or Iowa? I'm wanting to say Idaho because it's more conservative, that was trying to pass an abortion bill that not only would make abortion illegal, but it would make it illegal for you to travel to another state and have an abortion. It was one of those two, which that one would never survive
You
because now you're
you
going
can't
outside
do
of
that.
states' right. Yeah,
That's like
that
that's
doesn't pass any
that's
test.
absurd.
Yeah, but they were trying, and it's easy for me if I'm Fetterman or my crew after the stroke to say, "Look at what they're doing. They're going to do that here if you let it go all red. They're going to do that on a national level.
Mm-hmm.
If you give them a majority enough that it's going to go over the veto power, then they're going to do that on a national level." And that's the ads we were getting. We brought up the phone texts we were getting the whole
Mm-hmm.
time. That's what they were running on. And then you had the red side sending out the messages. Now, I will give credit to Texas. The Texas red messages I would get were just, "It's time to vote. Go vote. Please vote red." That was the message I was getting from that. And I was like, that's at least polite and not lying. But the national level stuff was, they're going to codify Roe if you don't vote, send money to this race or whatever, because we will
Yeah.
not.
Well, that was the final push in the last couple of weeks, and that's what Biden was out saying. That's what the Democratic leadership was saying is, vote Democrats and we will codify Roe v. Wade into federal law. And if
But
the
here
if the
here in
GOP
red
is
Texas,
Mhm.
we were saying, well, that's not even possible. And that's not even a big deal because inflation is worse.
Yeah, well,
And then, but now the exit polls in the purple states said, well, it was a big deal. And if you're the GOP, you have to understand people are different all over the place. That's why we have a House of Representatives,
yes.
because people are different all over the
And
place.
that's why we have a House of Representatives separate from a Senate.
Yeah.
But I digress. And how easy would it have been to, as part of that, hey, look, this is what the Supreme Court decision said, and we agree with it. It's up for New York to decide what they want to do with abortion, and let Texas decide what they want to do with abortion
And that
within their own boundaries, and we, the Republicans, will protect that federal system so that no one is going to impose upon you from outside. It's up to you and your
that also
fellow
leaves the
voters in the
messaging
state.
open because Oz was running for a federal office, right? So what
Mm-hmm.
happens in Pennsylvania state law is actually outside of his control.
Mm-hmm.
But he could speak for his party
Yep.
in the area. And he
And he
could have
could speak
helped.
for it on a federal level.
Yeah, he on a federal level, but he could have spoke for, and this is not what us Republicans want to do here, because we understand where you sit on this.
Yeah.
And he could have done that, but he didn't. And well, it wasn't the message,
But
because
but
inflation, inflation, inflation.
the other half of my point was, then as part of that, you could point out that the Democrats are either stupid or lying to you, because the Supreme Court just ruled that it's a state issue. They're not going to codify it into national law, or they're going to codify it and it's going to be immediately struck down by the same court that just said this is a state issue. It's not a federal issue. They can't codify it into national law. The Supreme Court just said so.
So everybody knows my thought on tinfoil hat, and I don't have a lead hat. But since I got hit in the head with a case of bullets at one time, that might protect me.
Right.
I still think it's no accident that there was a leak that forced a vote that made it an issue right before. I guarantee you, if we were allowed to see judicial documents within office, we would see that it was the three that knew it was going to be a failed vote that pushed the vote. And the leaked document was part of it to make sure that.
But don't worry, we're going to get to the bottom of it, and that person is going to be punished. Just like we're eventually going to get to the bottom of the Vegas shooter, his motives, and how he did it.
Well, this is also something that it's one of those exposures. So when we look at, okay, how can we go forward? Where were the issues? And one of the issues we're seeing more and more, and now that we're more aware of it with the internet age and everything, we can actually backtrack that to before 9/11 and even further back than that, is the fact that the DOJ is part of the presidential party is part of the problem, because this benefited the party of the person who wanted his side to win.
Mm.
But he appointed all the people who would investigate it.
Oh, that's like the one of the reasons there have been the only place where people have been talking about a fortified election and shenanigans and weirdness is in Arizona, because the person in charge of running elections is the Secretary of State of that state, who is one of the gubernatorial candidates. How the heck are you still allowed to perform that function rather than passing it off to an underling who may be completely beholden to you, maybe part of the same party, but at least you have the appearance of an unbiased adherence to the law?
So I don't have the final answer to this, but one of the things we have to explore is how do we make, we talked about deep state, we talk about all these things.
Mm-hmm.
How do lifetime appointments aren't how we do it. We figured this part out. How do we make the FBI, DOJ, Department of Homeland Security, the CDC, the FDA, how do we make these detached from either party in charge? And Fauci is a big fail because it was just a lifetime appointment. FDA is appointed, the head is appointed by the president, because Gottlieb, who's the head of Pfizer right now, it was appointed by Trump. How do we make these public servants that aren't beholden to a party is the question. And that's a question that probably needs a big, deep, dark answer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, I mean, maybe we every time make it the opposition party to the person in power. Maybe that's the answer, because at least the person in power can't use it as a weapon.
Well, the problem with that and what you're seeing here is that these bureaucrats, I mean, for crying out loud, how many months ago did we do did I do my kind of deep dive on Fauci and AIDS?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how long he's been there. That these people become entrenched and they become ideologues for their own survival, and they're not beholden to either party. To me, I think that's worse and more dangerous than the partisan part of it, is when they're just acting for themselves.
Well, that part's a little easier. You make it a true public service position. I'm cool with paying them more. Even everybody, gets their butt hurt about congressional raises and stuff. I would be for a pay raise there if they weren't allowed to publicly trade during the time.
Mm-hmm.
If Fauci wasn't allowed to give and take money, I mean, he gets paid $400,000 a year ish, somewhere around there, but he gets paid in the millions in speaking fees and all these little perks along the way. If we made it to where you get your nice, handsome salary, and maybe we up it to $1 million, I'm cool with that. If we stop spending money on women's studies in Pakistan, right? If we budget things right, maybe we make the biggest public health person in the country a 7-figure salary. Fine, but you can't take money from anywhere else. You are there to do your job as a public servant, and you're getting paid handsomely already for it. No influence from anywhere else. Same with the FDA. Same with the CDC. I am cool with upping everybody's pay. Same with a House of Representatives congressperson. I am cool with making it to where you can make a really good living by being in that position. If you cannot make or take money from other places. But you can't become a
tens of or hundreds of millionaire because you get inside information and then you go to the stock market and you do what we are legally prohibited from doing.
And you know what? You can't even write a book till up to like 10 years after you retire. There's a no compete clause here. That's perfectly acceptable. Make sure they're paid handsomely so we don't get like crap people in the job just because it's a sucky place to be. But at the same time, you can't become a Pelosi multi-gajillionaire on a modest salary.
Having never worked in the private sector ever.
Bernie, the man of the people, right?
Yeah.
Which, you know, he talks a good game. We have different ideas on what the solution is, but at least he knows who he should be talking to. There is that.
Well,
But
I need to start wrapping it up at some point because I've got an appointment to get to. Did you have other thoughts you wanted to get to, or is it mostly just election ranting?
no, it was mostly just election ranting. We do need to do theological, philosophical stuff this
Hmm.
weekend since we didn't do it last weekend.
Yep.
But we can
We'll
also,
talk about magic and ritual is where we left off last time.
yeah, and we could also squirt some fitness stuff in there if you wanted to.
Yeah, you know what? I was just about to say that we can tease because I asked you what the most important meal of the day was, and then we both just laughed and rolled our eyes at the inside joke. And rather than going into it now, we'll just kind of tease it and say we'll explain what that meant next time.
Which is yeah, there's lots of good topics because there's a lot of benefits to holding off on that what is
Hmm.
considered most important meal of the day. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, I guess we'll agree to disagree on the process,
Hmm.
but again, Republicans be happy.
Well,
Balance of
okay,
power was semi restored.
agree to disagree, but final thought on this is, look, this is where I stand on how you cast your vote. You need to decide for yourself personally what fits your principles. Don't do it just because of party politics. Don't do it just because I don't want the other side to win. No, no. You need to prioritize for yourself and figure out what fits in your principles
And I would
and
say
stick
he's
with that.
exactly right, but you also have to expand your mind on what your principles are. And my
Yeah, yeah.
principles were stopping this far left, extreme kind of executive push. And my other principle was getting majority in the House that will actually investigate the Faucis of the world. And hopefully that happens. And please don't disappoint me because you did
Yeah,
get the
we'll see.
majority. Yeah, we'll see. I'm not confident, but it was the only way it was going to happen.
Hmm.
So my principles aren't just on a party or candidate basis. So if you expand your principles, sometimes you come to different answers.
That's a good point of figure out what your principles are because I think a lot of people don't really know. And it's an important thing to know is wh where are your boundaries and what are your ideals?
And also the idea of understanding that people that live somewhere completely removed from where you are or have completely different lives from you have
Hmm.
different principles than you do. And that doesn't make them bad or evil.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think this is a message to both sides because the the average social justice warrior is a middle class white woman, right? She is. We've
Yeah.
ranted about that subject that subset of people
Go
because
go
they're
look at
actually
that Todd
causing more harm than good. So
go look
now
at
put
that
your
Todd
yeah.
Bowles press conference and the condescension of that ESPN reporter when she asked that, but you know that representation is important, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
jeez.
yeah, everybody wants to have empathy. Well, but when you're detached from a situation, you have to learn how to have empathy for that situation. You can't just put a caricature straw man of that situation and expect to have the properly focused empathy. So this is a lesson for all sides. Put yourself in that place. GOP could have done better had they figured that out. But at
Mm,
the same time, there's a lot of things that the left is doing wrong that they would do more right. Not
yeah,
right leaning, right as incorrect. If they put a little bit more of a thinking hat on and got into those shoes a little bit better.
yeah, yeah. All right, well, we'll see y'all next time and get into some totally different stuff.
Yep. Next time will be all fun stuff.
Oh, loads of fun.